A quirky college professor vanishes without a trace.
You would have spotted him a mile away. He would have been wearing a Hawaiian shirt, flip-flops.
He's not the type of person that would just go drive away someplace. So right away, I was in a panic.
His body later discovered at the bottom of a cliff. Police suspect foul play.
There was a flock of vultures literally circling in the air.
He'd been there for several days.
It was our pathologist's conclusion that he had actually survived the fall.
We need to determine whether it was a homicide, a suicide, or an accident.
The investigation leads to one of the professor's most trusted friends and a terrifying story of manipulation, betrayal, and greed.
A witness informed us that he did see a blonde female and a male at the scene.
What they were really planning on doing was luring him down to the beach, get him out into the water, and drown him.
When schemes falter, they stop at nothing to get rid of him.
To get in there, take advantage, and gain his trust. That was part of the plan from the very beginning.
What was the plan? To take him up in the quarry and push him up.
Nestled in the lush Nittany Valley of central Pennsylvania is the bustling town of State College.
We're a university town, but the minute you step out of the town, we're a rural county with residents who go back generations.
Over 8,000 of Penn State University's academic staff also live and work in the area. But on August 15, 2016, one of them goes missing.
State College Police Department received a call for a missing persons, a gentleman that lived in Lamont.
The callers say they're friends of Dr. Ronald Bettig, a 55-year-old professor.
They reported that Ronald Bettig had been missing for the entire weekend. They were calling from their house on a Monday. Ronald Bettig and the callers would speak on a regular basis and had regular communication with him.
They tell police that Ron had gone to the beach the previous week with his live-in girlfriend, Danelle Geier, and her uncle, George Ishler.
They knew he was supposed to come back on Friday, the 12th. Whenever several days went by and they had not heard from him, it caused them concern. Our patrol officers responded to the Bettig residence to see, if they could locate him or learn where he may be. When they arrived, Danelle Geier and George Ishler were at the residence. Danelle Geier described herself as Ronald Bettig's girlfriend. George Ishler described himself as Danelle Geier's uncle and a friend of Ronald Bettig.
George and Danelle confirm they were the ones who went with Ron to Rehoboth Beach in Delaware, a 5-hour drive from State College. They stayed at a hotel for a few days before returning with the professor on August 12th.
Danelle Geier indicated they had last seen Ronald Bettig on Friday, late Friday night into Saturday morning after they had returned from going to the beach.
Danelle tells police they went to bed after the long drive and George returned to his home. But when Danelle woke up, Ron was gone.
They were concerned about him, and they did find it also unusual that he had not shown up over the weekend. And they also knew his vehicle was not at the residence. They had serious concern. They indicated he was depressed over the loss of his wife from several years prior. He was having some mental health issues. They thought that something bad had happened to Ronald Bettig. The main issue was, where was Ronald Bettig and where was his vehicle?
Ronald Bettig was born in St. Joseph, Michigan in 1961 and grew up alongside a younger brother and sister.
He liked very simple things, wanting to be outside and being a part of nature, and was very strong inside of him.
His interest in academia was instilled by his mother, who held 2 doctorates in psychology and education.
Our parents were both immigrants. Honestly, what they ended up accomplishing was pretty remarkable. And I think that's where all 3 of the children really had a drive to succeed and to work hard.
Ron earned a PhD in communications, and in 1988, he was hired as a professor by Penn State University.
He taught in the media studies department, and he specifically taught the political economy of communications. He authored 2 books related to that.
Ron's lectures made him a popular, if eccentric, figure around campus.
He didn't like a lot of the technology that was out there. He really was more wanting to interact with them and wanted to have these deeper conversations.
You would have spotted him a mile away. He probably would have been wearing a Hawaiian shirt, flip-flops, and a pair of shorts. Longish hair, looks like somebody who grew up in the 60s.
He was a friendly individual. He was the kind of guy who would give you the shirt off his back if you needed it.
Over the course of his 30 years teaching, Ron was married twice. He had a son and daughter with his first wife.
He met his first wife once he went away to college. They were not getting along as well and decided to divorce and went their separate ways.
He then met the woman who would become his second wife, Jeannie.
He became involved with a colleague that was also at Penn State teaching there. I knew that he was really happy with the way that things were going with him and Jeannie together. Their interactions were very loving. With his second marriage, I think there was a lot of parts of him that really started coming alive.
Though the couple amicably divorced in the late 90s, they remained very close. But in 2011, tragedy struck when Jeannie took suddenly ill.
She was very sick, and he took her to the hospital, and later that night, or the next morning, she passed away. And they were together probably for 10 years. He would tell me all the time how much he missed her. He was losing weight, and he wasn't going out. And that's also the point where he started to have some memory issues.
4 years after Jeannie's death, the professor took a sabbatical from work.
By the time you get to 2014 and 2015, he's not doing very well. He's not able to teach.
While on sabbatical, Ron was befriended by a shop worker named George Ishler.
George was working at this tobacco shop on College Avenue in State College. Ron would stop in there frequently, and they struck up a friendship based on their mutual interest in marijuana.
As their friendship deepened, George confided in Ron about the struggles his niece Danelle Geier was facing.
She comes up here in February 2016. She doesn't have a place to live. She's got a young baby and no way to support herself.
I remember him calling me and saying, the thought of a person living in their car with a young child is just something that I can't let that go.
In 2016, Ron gave Danelle and her child a room of their own in his house, and having people around gave Ron something in return.
The life force was starting to come back into him. He had purpose. As he started having more and more conversations with Danelle, I think that he also was starting to have feelings for her as well.
After a few months, Ron's relationship with Danelle became romantic, despite their 23-year age difference.
He was very attentive to my sister and the baby. He was a very good man. He was always helping my sister get the things she needed.
What Danelle Geier was to Dr. Bettig was that kind of that bright light. He was no longer alone. He was in love.
After 7 months of living together, Ron has now gone missing. Danelle tells police she's been trying to help Ron with his memory loss and keeping track of his medications. Though George lives separately, he came over that morning when he learned of Ron's disappearance. Now she and her uncle are afraid he's wandered off on his own.
They mentioned that he had marijuana plants, that he would hike and take care of the plants. After the patrol officers returned back to the police station, I was immediately assigned as the detective. A lot of times, cell phone information can be a valuable way to quickly identify and locate somebody. In this case, Ronald Bettig did not have a cell phone. It did not use one.
When officers check Ron's bank records, they find cause for concern.
Ron's credit card had been used pretty regularly up until that weekend, and then all activity had just stopped. There had been no purchases on it.
If he was traveling, gas, food, lodging, at some point in time, he would run out of cash.
He's not the type of person that would just go drive away someplace. So for him to be missing from home right away, I was in a panic. I started asking, what's happening? What's going on?
Coming up, 2 days after the professor's disappearance, investigators make a gruesome discovery.
At the top of the quarry, they find a hand rake, a water bottle, and a flashlight.
She says that she's forced to help him stage the scene so it looked like an accidental fall.
After speaking with Dr. Ron Bettig's friends and family, State College police open an official missing persons investigation.
We listed him and his vehicle in a national database. We also did a media release on hopes that if anyone saw the vehicle or had contact with him, it would generate people calling in. Obviously, the longer a missing persons case goes, the more concern we have. So every day that went by without finding him or finding the vehicle, that concern became greater.
Investigators are able to locate surveillance footage from the trip to Rehoboth Beach, confirming Danelle and George's timeline of Ron's disappearance. On day 3 of the search, investigators get their first lead.
On Wednesday the 17th, first thing in the morning, I was advised by our 911 dispatch center that Ronald Bettig's vehicle had been located on a remote country road.
Investigators drive 10 miles outside of town.
The vehicle was parked unoccupied and off to the side of the road, and it appeared to have been sitting there for several days.
Dr. Bettig's vehicle has been a turnout next to a farmer's property, and to the left and up the hill is an abandoned quarry.
Myself and my supervisor respond to the location. We also notify at that point in time the Pennsylvania State Police. The vehicle appeared to be in good condition. It was not broken into. Obviously, the next step was trying to figure out and determine if Ronald Bettig was in the area.
Investigators and state police conduct a search around the edge of the deep quarry.
It's a limestone quarry that's being dug out, and it's an 80-foot drop from where they were to the bottom.
It was just wooded area that ended up right at a cliff's edge, and easily you could have fallen over.
At the top of the quarry, they find a hand rake, a water bottle, a bag of water softener, and a flashlight.
It's unclear if the items belong to Ron, but their attention is drawn to something else.
There was a flock of vultures literally circling in the air, and the trooper said that I'm pretty sure if we look underneath where that flock of vultures are, we're going to find Professor Bettig.
We proceeded to enter the quarry from the bottom. We found a clothed body laying at the rocks.
It was very obvious that this was Dr. Bettig. If you ran his driver's license record, he was literally wearing the same Hawaiian shirt in that picture.
The state police took over the investigation and the crime scene processing. At that point in time, it went from being a missing persons case to a death investigation. So we're now shifting gears and trying to figure out what happened to Ronald Bettig.
We just did a basic cursory exam there. We could see that he had obvious fractures of his extremities. We felt that he came off the top of the quarry. He had been there for several days, so he was decomposing. We was going off the assumption that the individual that we had was the missing person.
The medical examiner conducts the autopsy later that afternoon.
The findings were that Dr. Bettig's, both of his feet were terribly crushed, that his both femurs were symmetrically broken in very remarkably similar ways. He had no head injury, his heart and lungs, and no evidence of any trauma. He had no cracked ribs, so all of his vital organs were functioning.
We felt that, given the fractures where they was located, that he hit feet first. It was approximately 90 feet, and the cause of death was determined to become blunt force trauma.
It was our pathologist's conclusion that he had actually survived the fall for approximately 2 days.
Stranded without medical care, the professor eventually died from the effects of the fall. To find out his approximate time of death, investigators call in a forensic entomologist.
There was maggots crawling all over him, indicating he had been there for several days. With the weather, the warmer it is, the quicker the insects, the flies will arrive, and then they'll lay their eggs.
The entomologist dated the larvae based on how old the larvae were at the time of the autopsy.
He determined that the body had probably been there approximately 3 to 5 days.
But there's one answer the autopsy can't provide.
At this point in time, we could not determine from what we found at the scene whether it was a homicide, a suicide, or an accident. And that's why we decided that we would need to re-interview everybody and see if their stories matched up with the evidence and what we were finding at the scene. The evidence, the information we had, it didn't make sense.
After finding Dr. Ron Bettig's body at the bottom of a quarry, investigators are searching for potential witnesses.
One of our officers had conducted a canvass of the area near the quarry and located a gentleman who was mowing grass near the quarry during the time frame that Ron Bettig's car would have been arriving at the scene. That witness informed us that he did see a blonde female with a child and a male driving Ron's vehicle.
Detectives are stunned by the new development, knowing exactly who matches that description.
Now, the police want to go back and talk to Danelle. While they're planning to do this, Detective Chris Weaver from the State College Police Department gets a call from George Ishler.
George Ishler had reached out to me and indicated that he had learned through the media that Ronald Bettig had been found. He seemed upset. He indicated that he started having concerns about Danelle and why she hadn't reported Ronald Bettig missing sooner.
George tells investigators that on the ride home from Rehoboth Beach the previous Friday, tensions were high between Ron and Danelle.
He did mention that on the way back that there was an argument between him and Ronald Bettig over Danelle Geier and the way that Ronald Bettig was treating her. Basically, He's looking back now in hindsight, saying that he's now seeing and thinking that something was going on with Danelle.
He also suggested that Danelle had another man over to Ron's house while Ron was missing that weekend, and really seems to start to turn suspicion on Danelle as being responsible for Ron Bettig's death.
The following morning, which would have been now Thursday, the 18th, we went unannounced in the hopes of catching Danelle alone at the home.
She seemed a little nervous. She didn't seem distraught. We interviewed her starting from the beginning.
Danelle tells detectives that before she met Ron Bettig, she hadn't known much kindness in her life.
Danelle had a very tragic childhood and upbringing. She was repeatedly sexually abused and physically abused.
My understanding of her familial atmosphere was negative. I don't think that she was taught morals or value of herself.
She met her first husband, Thomas, in high school.
I always liked her in school. I just never told her. So I didn't know if she felt the same until a friend of ours hooked us both up together. We got married in 2003. The marriage was great up until we had our son. After he was born is when our relationship really started falling apart. We started, going through custody proceedings.
After a bitter separation, Danelle lost custody of her son.
She was traumatized when she lost custody. She didn't have the financial means to challenge the custody issues in court in Florida.
In her trauma, Danelle moved quickly from one relationship to another. She met her next boyfriend, Brandon, with whom she had a second son.
The relationship with Brandon was very chaotic. They were lovey-dovey at first when the baby was first born, but after that, it was nothing but fights.
When the relationship ended in 2016, Danelle was desperate to get back on her feet and returned to Pennsylvania.
She was always constantly living with people. She's never had an apartment of her own. She was bouncing between my house, my mom's house, and her dad's house.
She had 2 children. One of them was still in her custody, a young toddler. She was near homelessness, and that's when Ron took Danelle in.
Danelle told us that Ron took care of her, fed her, and gave her shelter, and was paying for much of the items needed for raising her child.
Danelle tells investigators she's often talked to her family about how much Ron means to her. So when he disappeared, she was frantic.
She basically gave the same version and a very consistent version of what she had told the first time to the patrol officers.
After Danelle commits to her story, detectives reveal Ron's body has been found.
We alluded to Danelle that George was pointing the finger and telling us that he was suspicious of her. And he's also adding that there was an unknown male with Danelle over the weekend. That concerned her, and she became emotional.
Danelle denies the accusations. But her reaction tells investigators there is more to the story.
I asked her, "What concerns you?" She answered with, she was concerned for the safety of herself and her son. I told her that we could ensure her safety, but she needed to tell us what happened.
At that point in time, she immediately made the statement that George had murdered Ronald Bettig and had pushed him off the quarry. When she initially blurted out, it was surprising, but as she began to tell what happened, it was consistent with our suspicions.
Coming up, The investigation becomes a case of he said, she said.
She asked, where is Ron? He said, I killed him. I killed him, and if you say anything to anybody about it, I'm going to kill you too.
And police hear the details of Ron's terrifying final moments.
What were you to do in Rehoboth? Kill the professor.
According to Danelle Geier, her uncle George Ishler is the one who killed Ron Bettig. And now that she's told them, she's afraid she'll be next.
She said she had nothing to do with it. She says that George Ishler has threatened to kill her, that she's afraid. She's afraid for the life of her child.
So at that point in time, she agreed to go with us to the Pennsylvania State Police Barracks.
Danelle tells a story that George Ishler is going down there to get money because he owes the professor money. He was mad at George Ishler because he had discovered the fact that he had been using his credit card for purchases that he wouldn't have authorized.
Though the professor had given Danelle access to his credit card for necessities, she had abused his goodwill by allowing George to use it without Ron's consent. Ron made it clear George would pay the money back.
George had told Danelle that he had loaned some money to someone in Delaware, and if they go there, he could get some of that money back and pay part of the debt that he owed Ron.
According to Danelle, George was unable to collect the money, so on the ride back, he made a peace offering.
George was now telling Ron that he had marijuana plants growing near a quarry, and they could go there and harvest these plants.
Ron agrees to this. They get to the quarry mid-afternoon on the 12th, and when they get there, Danelle stays with the car and the baby.
George and Ron disappeared into the woods heading towards the quarry.
Danelle tells investigators that George returned alone.
Danelle told us that she had asked George where Ron was. George said, "Don't worry, he's tending to the plants. We will come back for him." And they departed the area of the quarry and headed back to Ron's house.
It wasn't until back at the professor's house when she noticed the dirt on George's knees that she started to suspect that maybe George had done something. And that's when she asked George, where is Ron? He said, I killed him. I killed him, and if you say anything to anybody about it, I'm going to kill you too, and I'm going to kill your son. She was terrified.
She says that she's forced to help him get the professor's car out to the crime scene, park it so that George could stage the scene so it looked like an accidental fall when the professor went back out to tend to his supposed marijuana plants.
Danelle says George coerced her into planting water bottles and a flashlight to make it look like Ron went there by himself. Police hypothesize that this is when the witness saw the pair in Ron's vehicle.
It's very possible that when George and Danelle went back to plant the items, that Ron was still alive at the bottom of that quarry.
Investigators can't be sure Danelle is telling the truth, but for now, they have no evidence she was directly involved with Ron's death.
Danelle had no motive whatsoever to take his life, but George and the professor were arguing over money that George owed the professor. George didn't want to pay it back or couldn't pay it back.
She was released that night, knowing that she would likely come back for a follow-up interview.
It's decided at that point in time that we're going to try to reach out to George Ishler. It's now 11:30 at night, but we decided just to see if he'd be willing to come in. Without hesitation, he agreed.
When we started to speak about Ron's death and about the scene to him, we told him that we didn't feel that he was being truthful with us. Then he changes his story and then says, Ron and I were messing around, wrestling around at the top of the quarry, and he fell. And I posed the question, did you hurt the professor? And he said no. From that point on, he became a little more defensive.
I think he was slowly starting to realize that Danelle had told us the majority of what had occurred. We became more confrontational.
I explained to George the first thing he needed to do was to start being honest with us and tell us exactly what happened with the death of Ron Bettig. His next statement was, Danelle talked me into it. Danelle convinced me to kill him.
In the early morning hours of August 18th, 6 days after Ron Bettig fell to his death, his friend George Ishler confesses that his niece Danelle Geier was the driving force behind Ron's murder.
He said it was because Danelle wanted his money because of the will. We did not know what he was referring to when he mentioned the will. He explained to us that he had wrote a will knowing that Ron's mental state seemed to be diminishing, and Ron had signed it.
The will says that Danelle will inherit Ron's house and that George will become the executor of the remainder of his estate.
Danelle Geier thought he had about $1 million in Disney stock, and she believed that she was going to be a recipient.
The Disney stock that they thought was worth $1 million, that was worth about $50,000.
According to George, his and Danelle's plan to kill Ron was accelerated when Ron found out how much they'd spent using his credit cards.
They were racking up debt. The professor had discovered they had used his credit card after opening up a credit card statement and seeing all these charges that he wasn't aware of. So both Danelle and George knew that the gig was about up.
The whole thing was coming to an end, and Danelle was not going to have anywhere to go and be out in the street with her baby.
That was what compelled the trip to Rehoboth Beach.
What were you to do in Rehoboth? Kill the professor.
What they were really planning on doing was luring him down to the beach and drown him and kill him.
George goes as far to tell us that he did attempt it while they were in Rehoboth. He says he put his hands on Ron and dunked him once, but he couldn't do it.
Did you return to Pennsylvania after that? Yes. What was the plan? To take him up in the quarry and push him off.
He told Ron that he had marijuana plants at the top of this quarry.
What happened while you were up there? The professor and I struggled, and then I ended up pushing him off. I looked down afterwards, I thought he was dead.
At that time of this interview, it was about 6:30 in the morning on Friday morning, and George was placed under arrest and subsequently charged with first-degree murder, third-degree murder, aggravated assault, conspiracy to commit murder, and tampering with evidence.
But before investigators can arrest Danelle, they have to corroborate George's statement. They obtain a search warrant for George's cell phone and find an incriminating message.
We uncovered a text message that Danelle Geier had sent to George Ishler. The text message said, "I'm so ready, I'm pissed off." This text message was determined to be sent while they were in Delaware.
There's concerning texts between Danelle Geier and George Ishler that raise real questions. Not until police read those texts where there's something concrete to suggest that Ms. Geier is deeply involved in a conspiracy to commit murder.
So now on Saturday evening, on August 20th, we make contact with Danelle Geier and have her come back in for a follow-up interview.
After hours of questioning, Danelle finally confesses.
She finally breaks, and she admits her involvement in Ron's death. They thought they could get some money from this, and that they didn't like the way Ron was talking to them. He was being taken advantage of for his money.
She was placed under arrest and charged with first-degree murder, aggravated assault, and third-degree murder.
To prosecutors, the case appears to be open and shut. But before a trial date can be set, Danelle and George both submit motions to suppress their confessions and plead innocent to the charges.
The police had interrogated her for hours. They were all just, very soft, very defeated sounding yes and no answers. And the police took that to be a confession. After Danelle was arrested, the counselors made arrangements to have a psychologist come in and meet with her.
She had a hard life. She said that she had been sexually abused. Ron had taken her in and she was in trouble.
A lot of people were really, really, really concerned that a jury was going to feel sympathy for her and empathy for her. So that was the most important thing in this trial, was that she not get away with this.
In April 2018, more than a year and a half after Ronald Bettig's death, Danelle Geier and her uncle George Ishler stand trial for his murder.
Danelle's case was joined with George Ishler's case. So whenever we went to court, she had to sit at the same table as George. She had to look at George. It was very, very intimidating.
Danelle and George claim their confessions were coerced and are therefore inadmissible. But when the judge rules against them, their attorneys must re-strategize.
We not only had one, but we had two defendants that testified and actually took the stand themselves.
When George takes the stand, the story he tells is different from the one he gave to investigators.
He said that the professor actually committed suicide.
George Ishler testified that when they were at the quarry wall, at the cliff ledge, that the professor, literally almost like a cartoon character, started acting delirious and out of sorts, that he stood there and then he jumped off sideways. It was the craziest damn thing you've ever heard. Danelle Geier's strategy was much clearer. It was to paint George Ishler as a murderer and just an evil, dangerous human that Danelle Geier was very, very afraid of.
Danelle testifies she was unaware her uncle was planning to kill Ron and that he forced her to help cover it up.
Danelle said there had been no agreement, no conspiracy. George acted on his own.
As for the text message allegedly proving Danelle was the mastermind, her attorney argues the prosecution is reading too much into it.
I believe that the statement or her text message was, "I am pissed, I'm so ready." The police read into that she was so ready to kill the professor. That's not what Danielle meant by that at all. Yeah, she was pissed. They had driven all the way from State College to Rehoboth Beach, and they had been in this motel room for several days. She was pissed at George for doing whatever George was off doing. She was ready to come back to State College.
On cross-examination, she admitted that the professor would have never gotten in the car if she had not been there. I asked her at the very end, did I hear you say correctly that if you had not gone to Rehoboth Beach, the Professor Bettig would still be alive? And she said yes.
After a 6-day trial, the jury renders its verdict.
Both defendants were found guilty of first-degree murder, and in Pennsylvania, that's a mandatory life sentence without the possibility of parole.
There was such relief, if you can call it relief, it doesn't bring anybody back, but at least you feel like somebody will pay for what had happened.
I believe that George Ishler got what he deserved in the end. I don't believe that Danelle Geier got what she deserved. Had the jury heard the psychological testimony, I think the outcome would have been different.
Why did Danielle snap? She lost custody of her kid in Florida, and she needed money. She wanted that kid back desperately. She thought Dr. Bettig was $1 million price tag.
I think that was part of the plan from the very beginning, for her to get in there, form a fake relationship, and gain his trust, and then they were going to exploit that.
Ron was a very intriguing and complex person. And he had this one side of him that was just brilliant, intelligent, just have this great sorrow of what happened. You always look at things that way in hindsight and just say, if only I had done this, or if only I had done that. But our whole family has tried as best as we can to, put the past in the past and to move forward and to instead celebrate the goodness that Ron brought this world.
Texas, 1998. The road is empty.
No streetlights.
No houses. Just a thin stretch of asphalt cutting through dry land that seems to swallow sound. Out here, the night doesn't just fall. It presses down, heavy, absolute, suffocating. At 2:17 a.m., a call breaks the silence. A man's voice.
Low.
Unsteady. He doesn't give his name, doesn't explain how long he's been there. Just one sentence, rushed, like he's afraid of hearing himself say it twice. There's a car and something behind it. Then the line goes dead.
No callback. No trace.
Dispatch sends a unit anyway. 12 minutes later, headlights slice through the darkness, revealing a scene that doesn't make sense. Not yet. A sedan sits crooked on the shoulder. Driver's door open. Engine off. Keys still inside. The interior untouched. Purse on the passenger seat. Wallet visible. Nothing taken. No signs of panic. No signs of escape. And then, the beam shifts. Behind the car. Something in the dirt.
Still. Human. Wrong.
The officer steps closer, slower now. The air feels different, heavy with something unspoken. He radios it in, voice tightening as the reality settles. Female. Unresponsive. Possible homicide. Her name is Emily Carter. 27 years old. A school counselor. Known for remembering every student's name. Known for staying late when no one else would. Known in a town where being known meant safety. But tonight, safety didn't follow her. She left a friend's house at 12:43 a.m. A normal night. Laughter.
Coffee.
Nothing unusual. Nothing that would echo into something like this. Her drive home should have taken 15 minutes. She never made it. Now she lies in the dirt, miles off her route, her body positioned, not collapsed, not twisted in panic, but arranged in a way that suggests intent. That detail lingers. It shouldn't matter. But it does. Because people who die suddenly don't usually end up like this. Not without a reason. Backup arrives. Then more units. Then the sheriff. Flashing lights cut across the landscape, turning isolation into exposure. The quiet is replaced by radios, footsteps, controlled urgency. Crime scene tape stretches across emptiness. And still something feels off. No broken glass.
No skid marks.
No evidence of a violent struggle, not here.
Her shoes are clean.
Too clean. The ground is rough, uneven, coated with dust that clings to everything. But not to her. Not enough. Which means she didn't walk here. Didn't run. Didn't fight on this ground. So how did she end up here? The question settles into every corner of the investigation before the body is even moved. The medical examiner works under portable lights as the horizon begins to fade from black to gray. Time of death estimated between 1 o'clock and 2 a.m. Cause. Unclear at first glance, but something about the neck draws attention. Later, in the sterile brightness of the autopsy room, the truth becomes unavoidable. Strangulation.
Precise.
Controlled. Not chaotic. There are no deep defensive wounds.
No torn skin.
No broken nails. But there is something. Small. Almost invisible. Beneath her fingernails. Trace material. Skin cells that don't belong to her. DNA. In 1998, it's not the breakthrough it will one day become. It's collected, cataloged, stored carefully in a system that isn't ready to understand it yet. A clue that exists without a voice. Back at the station, the timeline begins to take shape. Emily leaves at 12:43. She makes a call at 12:51. Less than a minute. The number is unregistered, prepaid, disposable. It leads nowhere. At 1:12 a.m., a gas station camera catches a car matching hers driving past alone. No visible signs of distress. At 1:30 a.m., a truck driver reports seeing two vehicles pulled off along the same stretch of road where she will later be found. One is likely hers. The other, unknown. He remembers headlights, a silhouette, nothing more. He didn't stop. Didn't think anything was wrong. By the time investigators track him down, the memory is already fading. Every detail becomes fragile, unreliable. And still, it's all they have. Days pass. Interviews stack up. Friends, family, co-workers. Everyone says the same thing. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't secretive. She didn't have enemies. No recent arguments.
No threats.
No signs of fear. Her life was stable. Predictable. Safe. Which only makes the violence harder to place. Because crimes like this don't emerge from nothing. They come from somewhere.
Someone.
The investigation widens. Phone records analyzed. Routes retraced. Search teams sweep the surrounding area for anything missed, footprints, discarded items, fibers. Nothing substantial surfaces. It's as if whatever happened here was careful.
Planned.
Or practiced. Weeks turn into months. The case grows heavier. Not louder, quieter. Media attention spikes, then fades. Headlines shrink. The town tries to move on. But it doesn't fully succeed. Because absence has weight. And Emily's absence lingers in classrooms, in hallways, in the empty chair at meetings that no one removes. The sheriff holds press conferences with fewer answers each time. We are following leads. We are not ruling anything out. We need the public's help. But the public has already given what it can. And it wasn't enough. The file thickens. Photographs, reports, statements, theories. So many theories. Too many. Random encounter. Someone she knew. A passing predator. A planned meeting gone wrong. Each possibility opens doors and closes others. None of them stay open long. The DNA remains.
Stored.
Untouched by progress. Waiting. Years pass. New cases arrive. Old ones fade. But this one doesn't fully disappear. Detectives rotate in and out, each one reviewing the same evidence, the same photographs, the same unanswered questions. And each time they pause at the same point. The same detail. The same quiet anomaly. The way her body was placed. Not hidden. Not abandoned. Positioned. As if meant to be found. Or meant to say something. But what? No one can answer that.
Not then.
Maybe not ever. And so the label comes. Slowly, reluctantly. Cold case. 2 words that feel like closure but aren't. Because nothing about this is closed. Not the questions. Not the fear. Not the sense that something or someone is still out there untouched, unseen, waiting for time to do what the investigation could not. In Texas, the land holds heat long after the sun goes down. And sometimes, it holds secrets even longer. Time doesn't erase a crime. It just buries it under routine, paperwork, and the illusion that silence means safety. By early 1999, the file labeled Emily Carter is already thick enough to strain the metal rings of its binder. Photographs curl at the edges. Notes overlap. Leads cross each other out in ink that grows more aggressive with every failed direction. And still, no suspect.
No motive.
No explanation for why a woman with a predictable life ended up dead on a road that didn't belong to her. The detective assigned to the case, Daniel Hayes, stops trusting the obvious early. Because the obvious isn't working. He studies the timeline again, not as a sequence, but as a disruption. 12:43 a.m., Emily leaves. 12:51 a.m., the call. 1:12 a.m., the camera sighting. 1:30 a.m., 2 vehicles. Between those moments, something changes. Something interrupts a normal night and redirects it towards something final. Hayes doesn't believe in randomness, not here, not like this. The positioning of the body, the absence of chaos, the controlled nature of the killing, it all suggests something more deliberate than chance. He goes back to the call. The number is dead, but the existence of the call isn't. Why make it? Why so short? Why to a number that disappears? He pulls the audio again, grainy, barely useful, but still there. Emily's voice.
Calm. No distress.
Just a few words. Indistinct. Almost routine. But routine calls don't vanish. Someone wanted that number untraceable. Which means the call wasn't casual. It was planned. That realization shifts everything. Because now the question isn't just what happened on that road. It's what was arranged before she ever got there. Hayes starts digging into patterns, Emily's habits, her routes, her schedule over the past weeks. Not looking for anomalies, but for repetition. Something someone else could have learned. Something predictable enough to exploit. She leaves work at the same time most days. She visits the same grocery store every Thursday. She calls her parents every Sunday evening. She is, in every sense, traceable. Observable. routine. And routines can be watched. The theory begins to take shape, not as a conclusion, but as a possibility that refuses to go away. What if she wasn't targeted that night? What if she had been watched for weeks? Months? What if whoever did this knew exactly when to act? Hayes brings it up in a meeting. Some agree, others push back. There's no evidence of stalking. No reports.
No plans.
No witnesses who notice someone lingering too long, watching too closely. But that doesn't mean it didn't happen. It just means it wasn't seen. The investigation pivots quietly. Not announced, not formal. Just a shift in focus. They start looking at people who existed on the edges of her life. Not friends, not family, not coworkers. The ones who pass by unnoticed. Delivery drivers. Maintenance workers. Customers at places she frequented. People who could observe without being remembered. Names begin to surface. Then fall away. One by one, they're checked, questioned, cleared. Nothing sticks. And yet, the feeling remains. That someone is missing from the list. Someone who should be there but isn't. Spring turns into summer. The heat returns. And with it, frustration. The case begins to slow, not because of a lack of effort, but because every direction has been exhausted. Except one. The DNA. In 1999, it's still limited. The database is small. The technology is precise, but not widespread. If the person responsible has never been arrested, never processed, never entered into the system, then the DNA means nothing. It exists. But it doesn't connect. Still, Hayes pushes for it to be re-examined. Not for a match. For detail. The lab refines the sample again. Extracts more than before. Builds a clearer profile.
Male.
No further identifiers. No hits. But it's enough to confirm one thing. Whoever was there, whoever touched her in those final moments, left a trace that cannot be erased. Time won't remove it. Only recognition will. And recognition hasn't come. Not yet. By late 2000, the case is officially reassigned. Hayes moves on.
Not by choice.
By necessity. New cases demand attention. Living victims. Active threats. The system prioritizes urgency over memory. Emily Carter becomes archived. Not forgotten. But no longer active. The file moves to a different shelf. A quieter one. Dust begins to settle, not just physically, but psychologically. Because cold cases don't just lose momentum. They lose visibility. And visibility is what drives resolution. Without it, even the strongest leads weaken. Years pass. Technology evolves. DNA databases expand. States begin sharing information more efficiently. Cases once thought unsolvable begin to reopen, not because of new evidence, but because old evidence finally has somewhere to go. In 2003, Emily's DNA sample is entered again. Updated. Reformatted. Compared against a larger pool. Still nothing. No match.
No partial.
No familial link. Just silence. But this time it feels different. Because the absence of a match no longer means absence of identity. It means delay. Somewhere, the person responsible exists outside the system.
For now.
And systems grow. They always do. Meanwhile, the town continues its quiet adaptation. New families move in. Old ones move away. The memory of Emily Carter fades at the edges, but never disappears entirely. Her name still surfaces in conversations that drop in volume halfway through. Her story still gets told, but less often and with less detail each time. Until it becomes less of a case and more of a caution. Don't drive alone late at night. Don't stop for strangers. Don't assume safety. Because something happened here once. And no one ever explained it. In 2005, a new detective reviews the file. Not because of a breakthrough. Because of backlog. Routine reassessment. A process designed to ensure nothing is completely abandoned. He read it once. Then again. And like Hayes before him, he pauses at the same points. The call. The positioning. The absence of struggle. The unknown vehicle. Patterns begin to reemerge, not as answers, but as echoes. And echoes have a way of resurfacing when conditions are right. He notices something subtle. Something that had been documented, but never emphasized. The distance between where Emily was last seen and where she was found isn't just unusual. It's intentional. Not random miles. Specific miles. A location that requires knowledge of the area. A place you don't stumble upon. A place you choose. That realization narrows the field. Because now whoever did this knew the road, knew the terrain, knew where to go without hesitation. Which means they weren't passing through. They belonged. Somewhere nearby. The investigation stirs again. Quietly.
Carefully.
Because hope in cold cases is dangerous. It raises expectations. And expectations, when unmet, deepen the silence. But still. The file is reopened. Not officially. Not yet. But enough to move it from the shelf back to the desk. And in Texas. That's how something forgotten begins to breathe again. By 2006, the case isn't just old. It's quiet. Not the kind of quiet that brings peace. This is the kind that settles over something unfinished, something unresolved, something that refuses to disappear but no longer knows how to be heard. The file moves again. Not to storage.
To a desk.
Detective Marcus Reed doesn't ask for it. It lands in front of him with a stack of others, cold cases, unsolved, unresolved, waiting for someone willing to look where others already have. Most of them will stay closed. Statistically, that's the truth no one says out loud. But Reed doesn't start with statistics. He starts with instinct. He flips the file open, expecting the usual, fragmented leads, inconsistent witness accounts, evidence that leads nowhere. Instead, he finds something more dangerous.
Consistency. Too much of it.
The timeline is clean. The victim profile is stable. The physical evidence, limited but precise. Nothing contradicts. Nothing collapses under pressure. And that's what bothers him. Because real cases, messy cases, always have noise. This one doesn't. Which means whatever happened that night was controlled.
Planned. Contained.
Reed doesn't read the file once. He studies it. Line by line. He circles the same details Hayes circled years earlier. The call. The unknown number. The second vehicle.
The positioning of the body.
But he doesn't stop there. He asks a different question. Not what happened. But what didn't happen? Because absence leaves shape. And shape can reveal intent.
There was no theft.
No sexual assault reported. No signs of prolonged struggle. No witnesses placing anyone near her, except one unreliable sighting. No history of threats. No known enemies. No reason. Which means the motive isn't obvious. Or it isn't typical. Reed leans back, staring at the board he's begun to build. Photos pinned, strings drawn, timelines reconstructed in ink that's still fresh. Emily Carter. A life with no visible fractures. Until the night, everything breaks. He stands, moves closer to the image of the road where she was found. Rural. Isolated. Familiar only to those who know it. He marks a radius. 5 miles. 10. 15. Who lives here? Who travels here regularly? Who would feel comfortable enough to stop and stay? The list grows. Not thousands. Hundreds. But still too many. He narrows it again. Who fits the profile?
Male.
Physically capable. Familiar with the terrain. Invisible enough not to stand out. And this part matters. Someone who could interact with Emily without raising alarm. Not a stranger in the dark. Someone she might have stopped for. Or followed. Or met. The theory shifts again. Not random. Not entirely planned in advance. But opportunistic within a known pattern. A predator who doesn't hunt widely. One who waits. Watches. Chooses moments, not targets. Reed brings in the old evidence again. The DNA. Now, in 2006, the technology has changed. Not dramatically, but enough. Profiles can be compared more efficiently. Databases have grown. What was once a whisper is now something closer to a fingerprint. The sample is reprocessed, re-entered, rerun, and still no match. But Reed doesn't see failure. He sees distance shrinking. Because every year the system grows. Every arrest, every booking, every processed individual adds another layer to the net. And one day, that net will catch something. Or someone. He shifts focus again. The call. It's always the call. 12:51. Less than a minute. To a number that disappears. Disposable phones weren't common in her circle. Not in 1998. Not for someone like Emily. Which means the phone wasn't hers. Or the contact wasn't normal. Reed requests deeper analysis, something not available during the original investigation. Carrier records. Tower pings. Anything that might have been overlooked. The results are limited. Time has erased most of the usable data. But not all. One tower registers the call. A rural relay. Coverage area. Wide, but not infinite. He maps it. Overlays it with the location where her car was found. The zones intersect.
Tightly.
Closer than expected. Which means the call didn't happen far from where she died. It happened within reach. Within proximity. Which raises a new possibility. She didn't leave her route and then call. She called because she had already changed direction. Because something or someone had already influenced her path.
Reed feels it then.
Not certainty. But alignment. Pieces that don't solve the puzzle, but start to fit. He tracks the road again. Drives it himself. Daylight first. Then night. The second time is different. Because darkness changes everything. Visibility shrinks. Distances feel longer. Isolation intensifies. He stops where the car was found. Steps out. Listens. Nothing. No houses within immediate sight.
No ambient noisa.
Just wind and silence. If someone wanted privacy, this is where they'd find it. But it's not just privacy. It's control. Because out here, help doesn't arrive quickly. Out here, time stretches. And in that stretch, anything can happen. Reed looks at the ground. Different now than it was in 1998. Weathered. Changed. But still. He tries to imagine it. 2 vehicles. Engines off. Conversation or confrontation. And then strangulation.
Close.
Personal.
Silent. No gunshot.
No scream carried across distance. Just pressure. Until there's nothing left. He exhales slowly. Because this wasn't chaotic. This wasn't rushed. This was deliberate. Which means the person responsible was calm. Or experienced. Or both. Back at the station, he reviews local records. Not suspects. Not yet.
Patterns.
Reports of suspicious activity. Minor offenses. Anything that places individuals in that area repeatedly. One name appears. Then disappears. Not flagged. Not investigated. Just present. A local worker. Maintenance. Moves between properties. Flexible schedule. No criminal record at the time. Nothing that would have triggered attention in 1998. Reed marks it. Not as a suspect. As a point. A place to return. Because cold cases don't break open all at once.
They shift. Slightly.
Incrementally. Until one movement. One detail. Changes everything. And Reed knows. He's not there yet. But he's closer than the case has been in years. Because for the first time since 1998, the silence doesn't feel empty. It feels loaded. Like something is still inside it. Waiting. And in Texas, waiting doesn't mean gone. It means patient. By 2007, the case doesn't feel dead anymore. Not alive. Nothing that old ever fully returns to life, but no longer buried. It sits in that dangerous space between memory and momentum, where one detail can tip everything forward or send it collapsing back into silence. Detective Marcus Reed doesn't rush. Cold cases punish urgency. They reward patience. He keeps the board intact.
No dramatic rearrangements. No sweeping conclusions.
Just small adjustments. Lines redrawn, notes added, questions refined. Because now it's not about finding something new. It's about seeing what's already there differently. The name he marked earlier comes back. Not as a suspect. Not yet. Just a presence. A man who existed within the radius. Someone who worked maintenance across multiple rural properties. Someone who had reason to travel roads others didn't use. Someone who, on paper, looked ordinary enough to disappear inside routine. His name is never highlighted in the original file. Not questioned. Not even interviewed. Because in 1998, he didn't stand out. And cases like this are built on what stands out. Everything else gets left behind. Reed doesn't make that mistake. He pulls employment records, cross-references addresses, builds a quiet map of movement, where this man worked, where he traveled, how often his routes intersected with Emily's known patterns. There are overlaps. Not dramatic. Not obvious. But consistent. Too consistent to ignore. A grocery store she visited. A small office complex where she attended weekly meetings. A stretch of road, different from the one she was found on, but close enough to suggest familiarity. Reed studies the intersections. Not as coincidences. As opportunities. Because predators don't always choose victims. Sometimes they choose moments. And moments happen where paths cross. He doesn't bring it to the department yet. Not formally. Because suspicion without evidence is noise. And noise is what buried this case for years. Instead, he builds quietly. He looks into the man's history, not just criminal, but personal. No arrests in 1998.
No violent offenses.
No record that would have triggered a DNA sample. But there are gaps. Employment changes that don't fully align. Short-term jobs that end without explanation. Addresses that shift more often than expected for someone in his line of work. Nothing illegal. Nothing provable. But unstable. And instability, Reed knows, often leaves traces. He requests surveillance. Not aggressive. Just enough to observe patterns. Days pass. Then weeks. Nothing unusual. The man works.
Drives. Lives. Blends.
If he is the one. He's been blending for a long time. Reed feels the weight of it. Because the longer someone evades detection, the more practiced they become at it. And this case. This controlled, silent, precise act. It doesn't feel like a first attempt. It feels rehearsed. The thought doesn't sit well. Because if it's true, then Emily Carter may not have been the only one. He pulls regional reports. Unsolved cases. Disappearances. Assaults with similar characteristics. Strangulation. Isolation. Minimal evidence. A pattern begins to form, not clean, not definitive, but present. Different jurisdictions. Different victims. But echoes. Always echoes. Enough to suggest something moving between them. Not proven. Not connected. But possible. Reed doesn't jump. He doesn't assume. But he doesn't ignore it either. Because ignoring patterns is how they survive. Back in the lab, another step forward emerges. DNA technology has advanced again. Incrementally, but enough to matter. Partial matches. Familial searching. The ability to identify not the individual but someone close to them. A relative. A connection. The sample from Emily's case is submitted once more. Not for a direct match. For a relationship. Weeks pass. Long, quiet weeks. And then, a response. Not a match. But not nothing. A partial. Distant. A possible relative entered into the system from a separate case. Different county. Minor offense. But enough DNA overlap to suggest shared lineage. Reed reads the report twice. Then a third time. Because this is movement. For the first time in nearly a decade, the evidence isn't static. It's pointing. Not clearly. Not directly. But somewhere. He traces the relative, builds a family tree, expands outward. Names multiply. Branches grow. Too many possibilities. But one line, one branch, leads somewhere familiar. The maintenance worker. The man who existed quietly inside the radius. His name appears, not as the relative in the system, but connected. Distant but real. Reed feels it then. That shift. That alignment. Not proof, but convergence. Two separate paths, geography and genetics, intersecting at the same point. That doesn't happen by accident. Not in cases like this. He brings it forward. This time formally. The room is quiet as he lays it out. The overlaps. The patterns. The DNA connection. Not conclusive, but compelling. Enough to justify attention. Enough to justify pressure. A warrant isn't immediate. It can't be. There's still too much uncertainty. But surveillance increases. Background deepens. Every movement, every habit, every past connection is examined under a lens that didn't exist in 1998. And slowly, the ordinary begins to fracture. Small inconsistencies. Statements that don't align. Timelines that shift slightly depending on who's asking. Nothing that proves guilt, but enough to suggest concealment. Reed doesn't confront. Not yet. Because confrontation without certainty risks everything. Instead, he waits. Because now, time is no longer the enemy. Time is the ally. Every day that passes increases the chance that the system will catch up. That another relative will enter the database. That another connection will surface. That the net will tighten. And when it does, there will be no space left to hide. The man continues his life. Unaware. Or pretending to be. Working. Driving those same roads. Passing through the same quiet stretches of Texas that once held something far darker. Reed watches. Patient. Focused. Because after years of silence, the case is speaking again. Not loudly. Not clearly. But enough. Enough to hear. And enough to know. 1998 isn't finished. Not yet. Not even close. Pressure doesn't arrive all at once. It builds. Slow, invisible, relentless. By early 2008, the case has shifted from memory to motion. Not public. Not yet. But inside the department, inside a small circle of people who have seen the file, something is tightening. Detective Marcus Reed doesn't announce it. He doesn't say the word suspect. But the man, quiet, consistent, present in all the wrong places, has stopped being just a name on a page. He has become a focal point. And focal points attract scrutiny. The surveillance deepens. Not dramatic. Not aggressive. Subtle. A car that appears once too often in the distance. A face that blends into a crowd, but watches a little too long. Patterns begin to form, not in what the man does, but in what he avoids. He keeps to routine. Rigidly. Work. Home. Repeat. No late nights.
No unpredictable movements.
No risk. It's almost too clean. Because most people deviate. They break pattern. They improvise. But he doesn't. which suggests control, or fear, or both. Reed studies him from a distance, not physically but through data, schedules,
routes,
intersections with the past. Every road the man travels is mapped. Every location cross-referenced against Emily's known movements in the months before her death. And again, the overlaps. They're not coincidences anymore. They're repetitions. Reed marks them carefully, because repetition implies awareness, and awareness implies intent. Still, there's nothing direct. No witness placing him with her. No physical evidence tying him to the scene, at least not yet.
just the DNA.
Waiting. And now the possibility that it belongs to someone connected to him. But possibility isn't enough. Not for a warrant. Not for an arrest. So Reed changes approach. If the past won't give them what they need, then the present might. He pulls every interaction the man has had with law enforcement since 1998. Traffic stops. Minor complaints. Anything that might have resulted in contact. One entry stands out. 2004. A routine stop. Broken taillight. Nothing unusual. Except a note. Brief. Almost insignificant. Subject appeared nervous. No search conducted. No further action. Just a line in a report that could have meant anything. Or nothing. Reed doesn't dismiss it. He builds around it. Because nervousness in isolation is meaningless. But in context, it becomes something else. He requests the officer. Finds him. Asks him to recall. At first, there's hesitation. Too much time has passed. Too many stops. Too many faces. But Reed doesn't push for certainty. He pushes for impression. What do you remember feeling? The officer pauses. Then answers. Like he didn't want me looking too long. Not evidence. But not nothing. Reed adds it to the board. Another small fracture. Another shift. The pressure builds. Quietly. The man continues his routine. Unchanged. Unaware. Or pretending to be. Reed watches the house. Not directly. Through patterns. Lights on, lights off.
Departure times.
Return times.
Consistency.
Always consistency. Until one night, there's a change.
Small.
Almost invisible. The man leaves later than usual. Not dramatically. Just enough to register. Reed notes it. Tracks it. The car moves through familiar roads, then deviates. Not far. But enough. Enough to matter. He follows at a distance through coordinated units, careful not to break the pattern of invisibility they've maintained. The car turns onto a road Reed knows. A road he's driven. A road that leads towards something older than the investigation. Older than the file. The same stretch. The same isolation. The same silence. Where Emily Carter was found. The car slows. Then stops. For a moment, nothing happens. No movement.
No lights.
Just stillness. Then, the engine cuts. The man steps out. Stands there. Looking. Not at anything specific. just looking. As if measuring distance. As if remembering. Reed watches through binoculars, pulse steady but sharp. This is not coincidence. People don't return to places like this without reason. Not after 10 years. Not without something pulling them back. The man doesn't stay long. A few minutes. Then he gets back in the car. Drives away. Routine resumes. But the moment. That moment changes everything. Because behavior is evidence. Not enough for court. But enough for direction. Reed doesn't confront him. Doesn't escalate. Instead, he documents. Builds. Strengthens what is still fragile. Because now, there is movement tied to memory. Location tied to presence. And presence tied to possibility. The case tightens. Internally. Quietly. Requests are made. Forensic comparisons expanded. The DNA sample from Emily's case is prepared again. Not for reentry. For something more precise. A direct collection. But that requires access. Consent. Or cause. Reed begins constructing that cause. Every report. Every inconsistency. Every overlap. Every pattern. Stacked. Aligned. Presented. Because probable cause isn't a single moment. It's accumulation. And the accumulation is growing. Meanwhile, the man continues to live. Unchanged on the surface. But Reed knows. Pressure doesn't just exist in observation. It leaks. In subtle ways. In glances. In hesitation. In the feeling unseen, unspoken that something is shifting. And people who have something to hide feel that shift first. The next interaction comes unexpectedly. Another traffic stop. Different officer. Routine. But this time, there's a search. Nothing dramatic. Just procedure. The man complies.
Calm.
Controlled. Until they request a sample. Not formally. Not mandated. Just a question. A casual suggestion. For elimination purposes. His response is immediate. Firm.
No.
Not aggressive. Not defensive. Just final. And in that moment, Reed sees it clearly. Because innocent people refuse requests all the time. But they don't return to crime scenes. They don't align with DNA. They don't exist at every intersection of a dead woman's final hours. The refusal isn't proof. But it's signal. And the signal is loud. The case moves again. Not in leaps. In pressure. Because now, there's enough to push. Enough to justify. Enough to begin closing the distance between suspicion and certainty. And in Texas, that distance has been waiting 10 years to collapse. By the time 2009 arrives, the case no longer feels like a question. It feels like a countdown. Not visible to the outside world. Not printed in headlines. But inside the investigation, inside the quiet rooms where evidence is revisited and decisions are made, it's there. Something is closing in. Detective Marcus Reed doesn't rush the final stretch. He knows better. Cases don't break at their strongest point, they break where they're weakest. And right now, the case is strong in theory but fragile in proof. That has to change. The refusal. That single word, no, still echoes. Not aggressive, not panicked, controlled. Too controlled. Because control is what defined the crime. Control is what defined the years that followed. And now, control is what Reed intends to dismantle. The team builds toward it carefully. Every report is tightened. Every assumption is stripped away and rebuilt with documentation. Because what comes next won't allow for gaps. A warrant requires precision. A judge won't sign off on instinct. Only on structure.
Reed lays it out piece by piece.
The geographic overlap. The timeline intersections. The behavioral anomaly returning to the scene. The familial DNA connection. The refusal to provide a voluntary sample. Each element alone insufficient. Together, a pattern. A direction. A justification. The request is submitted. Then comes the wait. Days stretch longer than they should. Because this is the moment where everything can stall. Or move. The approval comes in quietly.
No announcement. No celebration.
Just a signature. But that signature changes the case. Because now,
they can act.
The warrant allows for the collection of DNA. Not directly. Not yet. But through what's left behind. Discarded items. Objects touched. Things the man no longer considers important. Because after 10 years, people forget what they've left behind. Surveillance shifts again. More focused. More intentional. The objective is simple. Obtain a clean sample. Confirm or eliminate. End the uncertainty. The man's routine becomes an advantage. Predictable. Reliable. Trackable. He stops at the same convenience store 3 times a week. Buys the same items. Pays in cash. Leaves without conversation. But this time, he leaves something else. A cup. Half finished. Discarded in a bin outside. The team moves fast. Not rushed, but precise. The item is collected. Bagged.
Logged.
Sent. Reed watches the process unfold from a distance. Because this is the pivot. The moment where years collapse into a single comparison. Evidence against evidence. Truth against silence. The lab works methodically.
No shortcuts. No assumptions.
Because contamination, error, misinterpretation. Any one of them could destroy the case before it ever reaches a courtroom. The DNA is extracted. Profiled.
Compared.
Time slows. Not literally, but perceptually. Because waiting for results like this, it compresses everything else. Reed reviews the file again. Not because he needs to. Because he has to. Every detail sharper now. Every question closer to an answer. The night. The road. The positioning. The call. The silence. All of it converging toward a point that didn't exist before.
Until now.
The call comes in late. After hours. Quiet. Controlled. The lab doesn't dramatize. They don't speculate. They state. Match. One word. But it lands heavier than anything that came before. Because it doesn't suggest. It confirms. The DNA under Emily Carter's fingernails matches the sample collected from the man. Not partial. Not familial.
Direct. Exact.
Undeniable. Reed doesn't react immediately.
He doesn't speak.
Because after 10 years, the case has moved from possibility to certainty. And certainty changes everything. The room fills slowly. Supervisors. Prosecutors. People who understand what this means, not just legally, but historically. A cold case. A decade old.
Now.
Solvable. But confirmation is only the beginning. Because evidence proves presence, not narrative. And narrative is what secures conviction. Reed begins reconstructing the final hours again. This time not as theory, as fact supported by evidence. The call. The meeting. The movement off route. The second vehicle. The road. The confrontation. The control. The strangulation. The positioning. All of it now anchored by a single truth. He was there. He touched her. He didn't disappear. He just waited. And now, waiting is over. The arrest isn't immediate. Not impulsive. Because once it happens, everything changes again.
Rights.
Silence. Legal defense. The opportunity to speak narrows. So timing matters. Preparation matters. Reed studies the man again. Not as a shadow. As a subject. A suspect. A confirmed presence in a crime scene that has waited 10 years for his name. They build the case outward. Re-interview. Re-examine. Everything viewed through the lens of what they now know. Small details shift. Witness statements gain weight. The truck driver's sighting, 2 vehicles, now aligns. The geographic familiarity confirmed. The pattern of movement supported. The return to the scene no longer ambiguous. It becomes behavior. Conscious. Intentional. The narrative forms. Not perfectly, but strongly. Strong enough. The warrant for arrest is prepared.
Signed.
Approved. The same quiet process that began the end. And still.
No annoncement.
Because the final moment, it isn't for the public. Not yet. It's for the case. For the years of silence. For the evidence that waited. For the woman who never made it home. The team moves at dawn. Controlled.
Planned.
Just like the crime once was. Because this time, control belongs to them. The man answers the door. Same as always. Routine. Predictable. Until it isn't. The words are read.
Clear.
Final. You are under arrest. For a moment, there's nothing.
No denial. No panic.
Just a pause. And in that pause, 10 years collapse. The road. The night. The silence. All of it returning at once. Because truth doesn't disappear. It waits. And in Texas, it has finally caught up. The room is small. Too small for what it's about to hold. Concrete walls. A metal table bolted to the floor. Two chairs facing each other like a confrontation that hasn't started yet, but already knows how it ends. The man sits down without resistance.
No struggle.
No questions. Just compliance. The same control he carried for 10 years still intact. Detective Marcus Reed watches through the glass.
Silent.
Observing. Because this moment, this is where cases fracture. Not in the lab. Not in the field. Here. Under light. Under pressure. Under the weight of truth finally stepping into the room. The suspect's hands rest on the table.
Still. Too still. Nose checking.
No visible stress. Just patience. Reed notes it. Because people who panic talk. People who stay calm. Choose their words. Or choose silence. The door opens. Two detectives enter.
No aggression.
No raised voices. Just presence. Authority that doesn't need to prove itself. They sit. One across. One to the side. Positioning matters. Everything matters. The recorder clicks on. Time stamps.
Protocol.
Structure. Because every word from this point forward has weight. State your name.
He does. Calm.
Measured.
No hesitation. No deviación.
Do you understand why you're here? A pause. Not long. Just enough to suggest calculation. Yes. One word. But not the one they expected. Not denial. Not confusion. Acknowledgement. Reed leans slightly closer to the glass. Because acknowledgement means awareness.
And awareness
Means he knows how much they have. Or thinks he does. The questioning begins slowly. Background first. Routine. Work. Daily patterns. Establishing baseline. Because before you break someone, you define them. The man answers consistently. Nothing new. Nothing unexpected. Everything aligns with what they already know. Until it doesn't. You ever been on County Road 17?
A beat.
There it is. The smallest shift. A flicker. Gone almost immediately. But Reed sees it. Because after 10 years, he knows where to look. Yes. Simple. Controlled. I work out there sometimes. The first opening. Not a denial. A justification. They follow it. How often?
Depends.
Last time? I don't remember. Not evasive. But not helpful. Neutral. Positioned. The detectives don't push. Not yet. They circle. Come back. Different angle. Do you know Emily Carter? Another pause. Longer this time.
Subtle.
But measurable.
No.
Flat. Immediate after the delay. Reed exhales slowly. Because that is the first break. Not in words. In timing. Because innocent recall is fast. Denial after hesitation is choice. And choice leaves cracks. The room tightens. Not physically. Psychologically. Because now they know where the pressure points are. The lead detective leans forward slightly. Not aggressive. Intentional. We have evidence placing you with her. No details.
No specifics.
Just statement. The man doesn't react. Not visibly. But silence stretches. Longer than before. Reed counts it.
1, 2,
3, 4. Then, I don't know what you're talking about. And there it is. Denial. But weaker. Because it follows acknowledgement. Follows hesitation. Follows presence. The detectives let it sit. Silence is a tool. And in silence, people reveal themselves. The man shifts slightly in his chair. First movement.
small,
But real. Control. Adjusting. They change direction. So, help us understand. You've been on that road. You've worked near her routes. You've lived here your whole life.
facts,
Stacked. Undeniable. We're trying to figure out how your DNA ended up under her fingernails. There's no pause this time. There's a break.
subtle,
But undeniable. His jaw tightens. Eyes drop. Just for a second. But enough. Because that is the moment truth enters the room. He recovers quickly. Too quickly. I don't know. But it's different now. The words are the same. The weight is not. Reed watches. Because this is the pivot. The shift from control to defense. They press. Not harder.
smarter,
Maybe you met her somewhere.
no,
Maybe she scratched you.
no,
Maybe something happened that got out of hand. Silence.
long,
Heavy. The suggestion lingers. Not an accusation. An opportunity. Because people confess in pieces. Not all at once.
they test,
They measure. They move closer to truth without stepping into it. The man breathes in slowly. Exhales. Eyes fixed on the table now. Not the detectives. Not the room. Inside himself. That's not what happened. The words land differently. Because they aren't denial. They're correction. And correction means there is a version. A story.
hidden,
Reed feels it. The shift. The opening. Because for 10 years, there was nothing.
now,
There is something.
small,
Fragile. But real. The detective leans in slightly more. Voice lower. Steadier. Then tell us what happened. Silence. Again. But this time, it's not empty. It's full. Full of calculation. Memory.
fear,
Because once he speaks, he can't go back. Once he defines the narrative, It exists. The man closes his eyes briefly. Just a second. Then opens them. Still not looking up. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. The room changes.
Completely.
Because that is the first truth. Not full. Not complete. But undeniable. Reed straightens slightly. Pulse steady. Because this is it. The collapse.
Slow.
Controlled. But irreversible. The detectives don't interrupt. Don't rush. Because pressure now must be precise. What wasn't? A pause. But shorter. She stopped. She pulled over. The words come out measured. Careful. Like stepping across something unstable. I just wanted to talk. Reed watches every movement. Every breath. Because now, the past is entering the present. Not as evidence. As memory. And memory is harder to control. What happened next? Silence. Then she got scared. A crack. Not in voice. In structure. Because fear introduces conflict. Conflict introduces escalation. And escalation leads to what they already know. The man swallows. Looks up for the first time. Not at the detectives. At nothing.
At space.
Like replaying it. She tried to leave. Another piece.
Closer now.
Closer to the road.
Closer to the moment.
I grabbed her. There it is. Physical contact.
Confirmed.
Aligned with DNA. Aligned with evidence. Aligned with everything that waited 10 years to be said. Reed doesn't move.
Doesn't speak.
Because this is the unraveling. And once it starts, it doesn't stop. Not completely. But enough. The man's voice lowers. I didn't mean. He stops. Because intention doesn't erase outcome.
And he knows it.
The room holds still. Every second stretched. Every word heavier than the last. Because now, the silence isn't empty anymore. It's full of truth. And after 10 years, truth is finally speaking. Confessions don't arrive whole. They fracture. They resist. They come out in pieces that don't always fit together until pressure forces them to. The room holds its breath. Not literally, but it feels that way. Because what has just been said cannot be taken back. She stopped. I grabbed her. 2 statements. Simple. Devastating. Enough to anchor everything that came before. And everything that's about to follow. Detective Marcus Reed watches without blinking. Because this is the narrowest part of the case, the moment where truth can expand or retreat. And if it retreats now, it may never come back. The suspect sits forward slightly. Not defensive. Not aggressive. Just heavier. As if the act of speaking has added weight. Because it has. Words make things real. And reality has been waiting 10 years to enter this room. The detective across from him doesn't rush. He doesn't jump ahead. He stays exactly where the man is. Why did she stop? A pause. But shorter now. She thought I needed help. There it is. The first layer of manipulation. Not force. Not threat. Opportunity. A moment of vulnerability used as an entry point. Reed feels the shift tighten. Because this wasn't random. It wasn't chaotic. It was engineered. She recognized you? A shake of the head.
No.
Then why pull over? Another pause. Longer. She saw the truck. What truck?
Mine.
The narrative expands. Slowly.
Carefully.
I was on the side of the road. Lights on. Like something was wrong. Reed closes his eyes for a fraction of a second. Because now, the call makes sense. The detour. The stop. The positioning. All of it aligning around a single idea. Deception. A staged problem. A lure. The detective presses gently. You planned it. Immediate response.
No.
Too fast. Too sharp. Reed marks it. Because truth doesn't rush. Denial does. The man exhales. Looks down again. I just saw her. A correction. Not full admission. But movement. I'd seen her before. The room stills again. Because this is where the pattern begins to surface. Where? At the store. Work. Driving. Fragments. Scattered. But consistent with what Reed has already built. Observation. Routine. Familiarity without connection. She didn't know you.
No.
But you knew her. Silence. Then. Yes. There it is. The asymmetry. One knows. The other doesn't. And in that imbalance, control. Reed watches the man's hands. They're no longer still. Subtle movement. Fingers pressing against each other. Pressure seeking release. What did you want? Another long pause. Because now, motive stands at the edge of the room. And motive is harder than action. I just wanted to talk. The same line. Repeated. But weaker. Because repetition doesn't strengthen truth. It exposes its limits. The detective leans in slightly. Voice calm. But you didn't just talk.
No acquiescen.
Just fact. The man's jaw tightens again. She got scared. Echo.
Return.
But this time, it carries more weight. Why? No answer. Because that answer leads somewhere he doesn't want to go. She tried to leave. And then, silence. Longer than before. Because now, they are at the moment. The point where everything irreversible begins. I grabbed her. Already said. But now, it expands. She screamed. First mention of sound. First crack in the silence of that night. Reed feels it. Because that detail, that one detail, changes the scene. From controlled to unstable. And you. I covered her mouth. The escalation is now visible. Physical. Immediate. Not planned. But not stopped. She fought. There it is. The missing piece. Because the autopsy showed little resistance. But not none. And now. The explanation begins to form. She scratched me. DNA.
Confirmed. Placed.
Aligned. Reed doesn't move. Because this is the bridge between science and story. Between evidence and voice. And then what happened? The question hangs. Heavy. Because the answer, they already know. But hearing it is different. I held her. How long? I don't know. But he does. He just won't say it. Until she stopped. There it is. No drama.
No detail.
Just finality. Because death, in this room, doesn't need description. It just needs acknowledgement. The man exhales again. Longer this time. Like something is leaving him. Or collapsing inside him. I didn't mean to. He stops. Again. Because intention is irrelevant now. The detectives don't argue. Don't correct. They let it exist. Because denial of intent is often the last shield. And it's thinner than the others. Reed watches the timeline rebuild itself. Not on paper. In voice. The call. The stop. The deception. The contact. The escalation. The control. The silence. All of it now. Connected. Not perfectly, but enough. The detective asks the next question carefully. Why move her? A shift.
Subtle.
But real. Because now, they're beyond the act. Into what came after. She was in the road. So, I didn't want anyone to see. Control returns. Not during. After. The need to manage. To shape the scene. To make it look like something else. A pause. Then. Yes. Honest. For the first time, fully. She wasn't just left. She was placed. The word echoes.
Placed.
The same word that sat in reports for 10 years. Now confirmed. Not by theory. By voice. Reed feels the final alignment click. Because that detail, that one detail, was never random. It was intention. Even after. Especially after. The man leans back slightly. Not relaxed. Exhausted. Because the weight is no longer contained. It's spoken. Documented. Real. The recorder continues to run. Capturing everything. Because this is the case closing itself. Not in court. Not in paperwork. But here. In a room that holds more truth than the last 10 years combined. The detective asks one final question.
Soft.
Measured. Why didn't you come forward? The longest silence yet. Because this is not about action.
This is about time.
About 10 years of living. Of not speaking. Of not being found. The man stares at the table. Then finally, I thought it was over. The words land quietly, but they carry everything. Because that belief is what allowed him to live, to continue, to blend, to exist. While the case sat waiting,
Cold. Silent.
unfinished. Reed steps back from the glass. Slowly. Because the truth is no longer inside the file. It's in the room. It's spoken. It's undeniable. And after 10 years, the silence has finally broken. But what it reveals is heavier than anything that came before. The truth doesn't explode.
It spreads.
Slow at first, contained inside reports, transcripts, sealed documents that move from one desk to another with quiet urgency. But once it reaches the surface, once it escapes the controlled rooms where it was first spoken, it changes everything. The arrest becomes public 3 days later. A name released. A face shown. A charge filed. And suddenly, what was once a cold case is no longer silent. Texas 1998 cold case solved. The headline runs before the details catch up. And when the details arrive, they don't soften anything. They sharpen it. Because the man they see on the screen isn't what they expected. Not a drifter. Not a stranger passing through. Not a ghost without roots. He's local.
Familiar.
The kind of face people recognize but can't quite place. Which makes it worse. Because now, the question isn't just who did this. It's how close were we to him the whole time. The town reacts in layers. Shock comes first. Immediate.
Raw.
Voices raised in disbelief. He lived here. He worked here. For 10 years. Then comes something quieter. More dangerous. Recognition. People begin to remember. Fragments at first. A face at the store. A truck on the road. A brief interaction that meant nothing until now. Because hindsight doesn't just clarify. It distorts. It fills gaps with certainty that didn't exist before. And suddenly, everyone feels closer to the crime than they were. Because proximity has been rewritten. The courtroom fills before the first hearing begins. Not just with media. With people. Residents. Former co-workers. Parents who remember Emily's name not from the news, but from school meetings, counseling sessions, conversations that once felt routine.
Now.
Nothing about them feels routine. Detective Marcus Reed sits in the back. Not part of the spectacle. Not part of the narrative being built in public. Just observing. Because what matters, what always mattered, already happened. In that room. In that confession. Everything else is structure. The defendant is brought in. No resistance. No visible reaction to the cameras, the whispers, the weight of attention pressing in from every direction.
He sits.
Same posture. Same control. But it's thinner now. Less convincing. Because control depends on secrecy. And secrecy is gone. The prosecutor lays it out. Not dramatically. Not emotionally. Fact by fact.
Timeline.
Evidence. DNA. The confession. The room listens.
Silent.
Because when truth is presented like this, it doesn't need emphasis. It carries itself. The defense pushes back. Not on the presence. Not on the DNA. But on intent. On the difference between what happened and what was meant to happen. Because in court, that difference defines everything. The argument forms quickly. Not premeditated. Not planned. A moment that escalated. A situation that spiraled beyond control. Words designed to reshape the narrative. To pull it away from calculation. Toward accident. But the details resist. The staged truck. The repeated observation. The return to the scene years later. These aren't accidents. They're patterns. And patterns don't disappear just because they're inconvenient. Witnesses are called. Not to place him there. That's already done. But to reconstruct the world around Emily.
Who she was. How she lived.
What was taken. Her mother's voice trembles, but doesn't break. Not fully. Because grief that lasts 10 years doesn't erupt. It settles.
Deep. Permanent. We waited, she says.
For answers.
No accusation. No anger.
Just statement. And that lands harder than anything else. Because waiting is what defined this case. Waiting for evidence. Waiting for technology. Waiting for truth. And now, waiting for justice. The forensic experts follow.
Technical. Precise.
They explain the DNA. How it was collected. How it was preserved. How it matched. Step by step. Layer by layer. Removing doubt. Because science doesn't argue. It demonstrates. And what it demonstrates is final. The confession is introduced.
Not the whole thing.
Not all at once. Selected. Structured. Enough to establish. Enough to confirm. But not enough to humanize. Because courts don't need the full story. They need the provable one. Still. The fragments echo. She stopped. I grabbed her. She got scared. Simple words. But in this room, they carry the weight of 10 years. The defense attempts to reframe. Pressure. Confusion. Misinterpretation. The idea that what was said isn't what it seems. But the structure holds. Because truth, once supported by evidence, doesn't collapse easily. It resists. Just like the case did. For a decade. Outside, the media builds its own version. Faster. Sharper. Simplified. Shocking arrest. Hidden in plain sight. DNA breakthrough ends decade-long mystery. Headlines compress years into seconds. But inside the courtroom, time moves differently. Measured. Deliberate. Because every word spoken here will outlast the noise outside. Reed watches it unfold. Not with satisfaction. Not with relief. Something more complicated. Because solving a case doesn't undo it. It doesn't return what was lost. It just defines it. Gives it edges. Turns uncertainty into something solid. And solid things don't fade the same way. The verdict doesn't come immediately. It never does. Because decisions like this, they carry weight that demands time, deliberation, silence. But when it comes, it's clear.
Guilty.
The word lands without echo. Because it doesn't need one. The room exhales. Not loudly, but collectively. Because something has shifted. Not healed. Not resolved.
But changed.
The case is no longer a question. It's an answer. The man shows no visible reaction.
No collapse. No outburst.
Just stillness. The same stillness that existed in that room. In that night. In those 10 years. But now. It means something else. Because stillness, when exposed, isn't control. It's emptiness. Reed stands slowly. Doesn't stay for the aftermath. Doesn't watch the reactions. Because his part, his real part, ended before this began. In the silence. In the waiting. In the moment truth finally spoke. Outside, the air feels different. Not lighter. Just clearer. Because uncertainty has weight. And now.
Some of it is gone.
But not all. Because even with answers, some questions remain. Not about who. Not about how. But about something deeper. Something that cases like this never fully resolve.
Why?
And that is the part that lingers. Long after the headlines fade. Long after the courtroom empties. Long after the case is closed. Because in Texas, 1998 didn't just end. It left something behind. And that something still hasn't disappeared. Years after the verdict, the town is quieter. Not because people have forgotten. Because some stories become too heavy to repeat. The name Emily Carter no longer appears on breaking news alerts. No longer flashes across television screens. No longer dominates conversations at dinner tables and coffee shops. The world moves forward. It always does. But some places don't move at the same speed. Some roads remember. Some communities remember. And some families never leave the moment when everything changed. The stretch of Texas Road where Emily was found still exists. The pavement has been repaired. The landscape has shifted. New signs have replaced old ones. The cars pass through every day without knowing what happened there. Without knowing that one night in 1998 became a dividing line between before and after. Before Emily disappeared. After Emily was found. Before the questions. After the answers. But answers do not erase pain. They only remove uncertainty. And for Emily's family, uncertainty had been its own kind of suffering. For 10 years, they lived with possibilities. Maybe someone knew something. Maybe someone would come forward. Maybe the phone would ring. Maybe the next investigator would find what everyone else missed. Hope became exhausting. Because hope requires waiting. And waiting changes people. It changes the way they sleep. The way they look at strangers. The way they hear unexpected footsteps outside the house. For years, Every unknown number carried a moment of fear. Every piece of mail created a reaction. Every knock on the door carried the possibility of something impossible. Then one morning, the call finally came. But it wasn't the call they had imagined. It wasn't Emily returning. It was justice arriving years too late. And that difference mattered. Because solving a cold case is not the same as fixing what was broken. The courtroom provided a conclusion. But not a return. Not a second chance. Not another conversation. Not another ordinary night. Those things were gone. And that was the reality everyone had to live with. After the trial, investigators returned to the evidence room. The same place where Emily's file had waited for years. But now, the atmosphere was different. The folder that once represented failure had become something else. A reminder. A warning. Proof that forgotten cases are not always finished cases. Because the evidence had been there the entire time. The DNA. The records. The details. The tiny pieces that seemed meaningless until technology and persistence gave them meaning. That is the strange nature of cold cases. They are not always missing answers. Sometimes they are waiting for the right question. The right tool. The right person willing to look again. Detective Marcus Reed later reflects on the case differently than most people. For the public, it becomes a story about a shocking arrest. A DNA breakthrough. A mystery solved. But for him,
it is a story about time.
Time lost. Time recovered. Time that cannot be returned. Because every cold case carries two timelines. The investigation timeline.
And the human timeline.
The investigation moves through evidence, reports, court dates, and procedures. The human timeline moves through birthdays, holidays, memories, and empty chairs. One eventually reaches an ending. The other never does. Emily's students who once knew her as a counselor grow older. Some become parents themselves. Some return to the area. Some tell their own children about the woman who helped them when they were young. And that becomes another part of the story. Because criminals often become the center of attention. Their names repeated. Their faces shown. Their actions analyzed. But victims are more than the final moments of their lives. Emily Carter was not a headline. She was not a case number. She was a person.
A daughter.
A friend. A mentor. Someone whose life existed before the night that took it away. And that is something the investigation never wanted forgotten. The arrest shocked the community. But the memory of Emily is what remained. Not the suspect. Not the courtroom. Not the years of silence. Her. The person behind the case. The person whose absence created the search. The person whose name kept the investigation alive when answers seemed impossible. Years later, the phrase "cold case solved" appears in archives. A simple sentence. A final label. But behind those words are thousands of hours. Thousands of pages. Countless conversations. People who refuse to let time become an excuse. Because time can hide things. But it can also reveal them. Technology continues to change. DNA becomes more powerful. Databases become larger. Investigators gain tools that did not exist when Emily died. And every new advancement creates the possibility that another family may finally receive the answer they have been waiting for. That is the legacy of cases like this. Not just the arrest. Not just the conviction. The reminder. The reminder that evidence does not expire. That silence does not mean absence. That a person can run from the truth for years, but never outrun it forever. The road where Emily was found becomes ordinary again. That may seem strange, almost impossible. How can a place connected to something so painful become normal? But that is what happens. Life returns.
Cars drive by.
People travel home. The sun rises. The world continues. And maybe that is the hardest part of these stories. The world keeps moving, even when someone's world has stopped. For Emily's family, closure is complicated. There is relief. There is gratitude. There is anger. There is sadness. All existing at the same time. Because justice can answer who? It can answer how.
It can answer when.
But it cannot answer every question. It cannot explain why someone chose violence. It cannot return the years that were stolen. It cannot remove the memory of loss. It can only acknowledge it. And sometimes, acknowledgement is the closest thing to peace. The final pages of the case file are eventually closed. The photographs are archived. The reports are stored. The courtroom recordings become history. But the story remains. Because some mysteries are remembered because they are unsolved. Others are remembered because they took too long to solve. Emily Carter's case belongs to the second kind. A mystery that survived years of silence. A cold case that refused to disappear. A crime that waited for science to catch up. And when it finally did, the truth was no longer hidden. It was standing there, waiting. Just like it had been since 1998. Because every cold case carries the same message. No matter how much time passes. No matter how quiet the world becomes. No matter how far someone runs. The past does not forget. And eventually, it finds its way back. The final chapter of a cold case is never truly final. Because when a mystery ends, the questions do not disappear.
They change.
They move from investigators to historians. From evidence rooms to memories. From police reports to the quiet conversations of people who still remember where they were when the truth finally arrived. For years, Emily Carter's name represented uncertainty. A missing piece. A question without an answer. A photograph on a board. A file waiting in a cabinet. But after the arrest, after the trial, after the evidence was presented and the verdict was delivered, her name became something different. A reminder. A reminder that time does not always protect the guilty. A reminder that silence is not the same as escape. A reminder that even the smallest trace can survive long after everything else has disappeared. The DNA that changed the case was invisible. A microscopic piece of evidence left behind in a moment of violence. Something impossible to see. Something impossible to ignore once science caught up. And that is what makes cold cases so haunting. The answer can exist long before anyone knows how to find it. The truth can be sitting in the dark, waiting for someone to turn on the light. After the conviction, investigators continue reviewing the case, not because they doubt the outcome, but because every solved case leaves behind a deeper responsibility. Understanding.
Learning.
Preventing the same mistakes from happening again. They examine every step, every decision, every moment where the investigation slowed, every opportunity where technology could have changed the outcome sooner. Because behind every cold case is a painful reality. Someone waited. A family waited. A community waited. A victim's memory waited. And every year that passes is a year that cannot be recovered. The The case of Emily Carter becomes a symbol of that waiting. A symbol of the years between tragedy and justice. The years when her family had to celebrate holidays without answers. The years when birthdays arrived with one person missing. The years when people wondered whether the truth would ever be known. And then one day, it was. But justice arriving late carries a different kind of weight. Because there is always a moment after the answer comes when people realize something difficult. The mystery is over. But the loss remains. The suspect can be identified. The evidence can be explained. The timeline can be reconstructed. But the empty space left behind cannot be filled. That space belongs to the people who loved her. And that is something no courtroom can change. Years later, former investigators describe the case differently. They don't focus only on the arrest. They talk about persistence. They talk about the people who refuse to let the file become just another forgotten folder. They talk about the investigators who return to the same evidence again and again, searching for something they might have missed. A different angle. A hidden connection. A detail that suddenly mattered. Because solving a cold case is rarely about discovering one magical piece of evidence. It is about understanding how every piece fits together. A witness statement. A forgotten record. A preserved sample. A technological breakthrough. A decision to look one more time. That is how impossible cases begin to move. Not with a single dramatic moment, but with thousands of small efforts finally pointing in the same direction. And that is what happened here. The road. The vehicle. The unknown call. The DNA. The confession. Every piece waited for the others. Every clue carried part of the truth. Separately, they were fragments. Together, they became a story. The story of a night that changed a family forever. The story of a community forced to live with fear. The story of a killer who believed time had erased what happened. But time did something else. It preserved the evidence. It expanded the technology. It brought new investigators. And eventually, it brought the truth. The phrase cold case solved sounds simple. For words. A headline. A conclusion. But behind those words are years of uncertainty. Years of work. Years of pain. A cold case is never just a case. It is a living wound. And when it closes, the scar remains. The community around Emily's hometown slowly returns to normal. The conversations become less frequent. The cameras leave. The reporters move on to newer stories. That is how the world works. Attention moves quickly. But memory moves differently. Some people still remember the first night. The flashing lights. The blocked roads. The feeling that something terrible had happened. Others remember the years afterward. The unanswered questions. The rumors. The theories. The frustration. And some remember the final moment. The moment when a name was finally attached to the crime. When uncertainty became reality. When the words "we don't know" were replaced with "we know." For many, that moment brought relief. For others, it brought a different kind of pain. Because knowing the truth also means knowing what happened. And some truths are heavy. But even heavy truths are better than endless questions. That is what investigators often say about cold cases. Families deserve answers. Not perfect endings. Not erased pain. Answers. Because every person deserves to be remembered for more than the mystery surrounding their death. Emily Carter's story did not begin on that lonely Texas road. And it did not end in a courtroom. Her story existed before the crime. In the people she helped. In the conversations she had. In the ordinary moments that made up an ordinary life. That is what remains. Not just the investigation. Not just the evidence. Not just the arrest. The person. And maybe that is the most important lesson hidden inside every cold case. Behind every file number is a human being. Behind every photograph is a life. Behind every investigation is a family waiting for a piece of the world to make sense again. Technology will continue advancing. New methods will appear. Old evidence will be examined with new eyes. Cases once considered impossible will continue to reopen. And somewhere, inside another evidence room, another file may be waiting. A box. A report. A sample collected years earlier. A clue that has been silent for decades. Waiting for the moment when someone finally understands what it was saying. Because evidence does not forget. Time does not erase everything. And justice does not always move quickly. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes it takes decades. But sometimes, when the right people keep searching, when science catches up, when the truth refuses to disappear, the silence finally breaks. And when it does, the world learns something it should never forget. A cold case is not a forgotten case. It is a case waiting for its moment. And for Emily Carter, that moment finally came.